So I had to really think about it, right?
Right.
Because there are so many things that we go through.
Right.
And so the topic is PTSD, and not in the way that we typically talk about PTSD.
Right.
I think we mostly talk about PTSD. Not, I think we mostly talk about PTSD in the context of military service, and sometimes in the context of violence, but mostly military.
Right.
And I got to thinking about this idea of PTSD as Black gay men, and kind of just the stuff, the things,
Right. The things we kind of go through.
that we go through and that we hold.
Right.
Because these things happen, you figure out how to cope with them, and then you move on.
Right.
Right. So this really came up for me when I saw the clips of Lil Nas X on The Shop, and watching 20-year-old Lil Nas X, who is just winning. I'm gonna love on Lil Nas X for a quick second.
He's winning, right?
He's really winning, and to do what he's doing at the level that he's at right now is so important. So I want to say that Counter Narrative Project, we absolutely love and support you.
We love you.
And but I was watching him in this clip, and I'm watching Kevin Hart kind of like gut punch him a couple of times, and I wanted to just like envelop and protect my brother.
Right.
And it got me thinking about ways that these things happen. We figure out how to deal with them, but they stick.
Right, right. And I was watching the same show, and I was thinking to myself, what is he going through right now that he's having to kind of deal with this? And I mean, he's relatively young. I'm sure he's probably had some traumatic experiences in his life. But, you know, Kevin Hart sitting there, you know, a bunch of NBA players and other kind of, you know, Charlemagne the God's there. Other people are there that are like these really kind of hard hetero, supposedly, people. And Kevin Hart is sitting there wailing away, being like, why is it necessary? Why is it necessary? Why you got to do this? Why is it necessary to come out and all this other stuff? And he has to explain that to them, like, if you're from the hood, you know what people think about it. And then they're asking, well, what's it? What are you talking about? He's like, homosexual behavior. It's not accepted. What are you talking about? And I remember him saying very profoundly, like, look, it was important to me to do it while I was at the top of my game so that people that are watching can see. Because for every one Lil Nas X that actually did that, there's probably been about 10,000 cowards who had the pinnacle of their success and were afraid to just be their authentic self. Because I don't even want to call it coming out of the closet. I think it's just bullshit. How, like when they said, you know, Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade's son, who's 12 years old. Oh, I'm so happy that he came out as gay. The fuck, he's 12 years old. Again, he's just existing. So to me, it wasn't like Lil Nas X coming out. He's just living in his truth. And I think when, you know, Kevin Hart is sitting there asking, why is it necessary? That's completely, it didn't piss me off. It just annoyed me. Because I was like, girl, like, are you going to act like this is not a problem for most people? Like, why would you ask if somebody has to necessarily be honest about their sexual orientation and why that's particularly important for same gender loving folks? It's the stupidest fucking question I ever heard in my entire life. So, but I could see the look on Lil Nas's face, and he was just being silent after that one part. He really didn't say anything else for the rest of the show. And so I was wondering to myself, like, what kind of trauma? And then it brought me back to kind of barbershops that we've all been in as Black gay men. And when people bring up homosexuality and people are trying to flex and act like they're hyper heterosexual and, you know, come down on homosexuals, like, there's usually a continuum of how we respond. We'll either, like me, I'll decide it's time to give LGBT 101 or trans 101 and try to educate the folks. Other people just stay silent. And then other people will stay silent, but then kind of guess. Other people just say, you know what, it's not fucking worth it. It's not worth it. Like, these people are crazy, and it's not my job to educate them right now. And I think if you were to talk to a whole group of brothers, and I think you get a completely different response. And I think at one point we should do a show on that, because what I think is going to be important is that, you know, we bring people on here from various backgrounds of the Black same gender loving experience and say, look, you know, we've got barbers here. We've got other people that frequent barbershops. What have you done when people bring up this stuff and they want to bash folks who aren't heterosexual or who are same gender loving?
Like, and sometimes it's perception.
Right.
It's like perceived, you know, and the reason why I'm so glad we're having this conversation tonight is because I think that, I'm speaking for me personally. For Johnny Cornegay, it's giving myself permission to know that listen, there are experiences that I've had in the past that have left me with ways I approach the world, and I found coping mechanisms to deal with those things, right? And so I was having a conversation with my best friend. We were talking about high school. I can't remember the question. Mm-hmm. I spiraled into this conversation about my ninth grade experience and how in that moment I was hurt. And I said, like, oh my God, like, I am feeling those feelings again. I am 42 years old feeling 25-year-old.
And it was just
feelings.
Something from the conversation. Like, it wasn't like somebody else called you a name or bullied you or did some other bullshit like that. It just came up in conversation.
It just came up in conversation. And so when I'm thinking about this topic, and so as folks are kind of viewing this and starting to talk to each other, please have this conversation amongst yourselves, and leave comments as well. So if you're watching this after the fact, because I think I'm not the only one that's experienced that. No. And, this is saying, at least for me, that one, those feelings are valid. And two, these feelings happen for a reason. Yeah. And to not ignore the stuff that's happened to us.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and I know you're going to do this because you have it on your phone. Mm-hmm. We have kind of like a textbook definition for those of you, like, people may throw out the phrase PTSD, which stands for post-traumatic stress disorder, and they throw it around as a catchphrase, or they throw it around. And so I think it's important for us to kind of give y'all what the textbook definition is, so you can kind of understand what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And so, and I want to also say that we're having this conversation using that kind of framework, but not necessarily talking about kind of the, the diagnosis.
Absolutely.
So just wanted to call that out. But this is from the Mayo Clinic. .org, and their overview is post-traumatic stress disorder is a mental health condition that's triggered by a terrifying event, either experiencing it or witnessing it. Symptoms may include flashbacks, nightmares, and severe anxiety, as well as uncontrollable thoughts about the event. Most people who go through traumatic events may have a temporary difficulty adjusting and coping, but with time and good self-care, they usually get better. If the symptoms get worse, last for months or even years, and interfere with your day-to-day functioning, you may have PTSD.
Yeah, and I think that's important. And even to expound on that, what I would recommend if people want to look into it, the DSM-5, which is the official psychiatric criteria, and they break down all different kinds of psychiatric diagnoses, from bipolar, schizophrenia, anxiety, depression. PTSD is considered one. They have a whole list of criteria that's a lot more expansive than that definition. But when you read through some of those definitions, like meeting certain criteria, there are like major criteria, like if you had a traumatic event in the military or were the victim of a sexual assault. All you need, as you kind of parse through, the definition becomes broader, and you're thinking about things like, okay, if you've gone through this, if you've had this event, and then it stays with you for a period of time. Looking over some of the definition by the DSM-5, and I can't remember what it stands for, Diagnostic Statistical Manual, I think Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Psychiatric Diagnoses, but it's the official psychiatric manual for psychiatric diagnoses. If you look at it and start to look at all the criteria, I guarantee you there's something in your life that would kind of put you in that category where you think, oh my God, do I have PTSD from that? And I think one of the important things that, Johnny, you mentioned is that if it starts to interfere with your daily life and your normal function, and only you can define what your normal, typical day-to-day is, and it's important for you to notice when you fall out of that and you start thinking to yourself, okay, this is actually affecting me to the point where I'm not functioning the way I used to. And I think that's an important component of it.
You just brought up something that I think is really important, and I think as we have this dialogue, and I'm curious to know what other people think as well, and make sure that you hit the thumbs up button and the subscribe button. But I'm curious to know what people think. I didn't recognize that stuff triggered stuff triggered me in the way that it had until I think I had dealt with certain things in my life that like made me see. So when you have those experiences, where the experience of sitting at the table, where generally I'm like fine in that particular thing, but then I'm like, oh my God, like that thing bothers me or bothered me.
Right.
But I had to get to a point where you'd gone through some stuff and you'd figured out how to work through things or gotten help to work through things.
Yeah, and that's an important point because I think a lot of people think that it has to be directly related or have a inciting event right at the time. And it's very similar to like panic attacks.
Mm-hmm.
Like when people have a panic attack and they have full-fledged like chest pain, shortness of breath, they get sweaty, they feel like everything's caving in on them. You think it happens right after an event makes you that nervous. And that's not always the case. It could be that 2 or 3 days ago, you broke up with your partner or a close family member died. And you're okay at that moment when it happened because you're whatever suppressing it and kind of saying, oh, I'm okay with this. 2 or 3 days later, you're just sitting there watching TV, you start having chest pain. So it's important for people to understand that it doesn't have to be right after whatever it happens. Like somebody says something to you that triggers your PTSD and it happens. Like, you know, for me, even like we talked about earlier, I made a connection with relationships and being raised by a kind of very strict Haitian father who wanted academics to be the best. And so when I did something good, it was never recognized and it was said, well, why don't you do more? Or if you got a 99 on the test, why didn't you get 100? That was my upbringing. So not only did it affect me in that nothing was ever good enough for me, like when I was scoring on tests or my work ethic, those kind of things, but it also infiltrated into my relationships where I was looking at stuff and saying, you know, if somebody was doing stuff for me, or I was doing stuff for somebody else, I'm sorry. If I was like taking time out of my day, making time, being consistent, texting, calling, spending time with someone, and someone looks at me at the end of the day that I'm dating and says, you need to do more.
Yes.
Or I want you to do more. I didn't realize that I would shut down until a brother I was actively dating actually called me on that and then called himself on it because he looked at our past texts and said, well, why do I keep asking you to do more when you're obviously doing so much? Like that was his homework he had to do for himself. But then he said, I noticed about you that as soon as I ask you to do more or do something else and you've already been doing stuff, you just shut down. And I was thinking to myself, okay, that's a trigger. And obviously I'm older, I'm 50 years old now, but the way my childhood was, and this doesn't even have to do with academics or scoring a 99 on a test, it's somebody that I'm romantically interested in. I'm doing a lot of shit for them, and they just look at me and say, I need you to do more. I'm like, and I'd never quite understood that before. And when I made the connection, I was like, oh my God, I've been doing this to so many people. But it's not their fault.
Right.
In that they don't know that I was raised this way. They don't know that I've internalized being raised this way, that way. And so they're just asking me like a regular relationship thing. Like, I know you're doing X, Y, and Z, but can you do this? Because we booze now. So all they're asking is for more time. And I kept thinking to myself, I was always confused. I was like, they're not needy.
Right.
It's not like they're asking me for too much. Like, what is it that I'm holding on to? And that's when I started to realize this was like some post-traumatic stress because those issues were traumatizing for me. Those events where nothing was good enough or I was told that it wasn't good enough was traumatic for me. And again, when we talk about post-traumatic stress disorder, it's important to acknowledge and respect that what may be a trauma for you may not be a trauma for someone else, and what is not traumatic for you may be completely traumatic for somebody else. So never to dismiss what someone else's experience of trauma is.
Right. And I think going into that, so being a man of size, I've always been a person of size my entire life. I used to have this joke. It was like, I was the smallest size that I was until I wasn't, you know what I'm saying? Until I passed that one. Right. And I so when I walk into a space, I always am walking in as the fat kid. No matter where I am, even if I'm in a room full of other people of size, I'm always walking in as the fat kid. So it manifests itself in so many different ways. Right. My anxiety, my social anxiety, I created, so if folks know me artistically, J. Ray was like a persona. So it was a persona that was created, and it was created so that I could do my artistic work. So much of the creation of J. Ray was because I knew that Johnny couldn't show up.
Yep.
Because if I'm showing up as Johnny, like Johnny's not able to do that. But J. Ray could put on glasses and put on a hat, and be cool. all of so J Ray is mostly put to bed because now I've worked through stuff.
Yeah.
But that social anxiety, that fat kid,
right,
still, every time I walk into a room of people,
right,
he's always present, and I'm always having to shut
right,
that up. I've done that. With help and also with practice, I've been able to do that work.
mm-hmm.
But I recognize that that's coming from deep, deep and way back, and it's okay to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I figured out ways to cope with it.
It's also like you avoiding the triggers.
Absolutely.
Like, and that's, again, part of, I think, the whole thing. And when you look at the DSM-5, you can see how they define how you do changes. You try to avoid stuff. You suppress stuff. You do all these other things to avoid those triggers and avoid that trauma over again. Like, even for me, when I was in Philadelphia, I met a brother on Craigslist. When they were still like, you could still be brothers on Craigslist.
Right.
And turns out he just was a different person than who I had met. And turns out he had been arrested so many times. He had different aliases, different houses. And just there was a lot of issues. And when I got wind of it, I started to pull back, and then he started to freak out, and then he called my phone one time, I think 35 times within the span of a few hours. And so when the phone would ring, it would trigger me. And then we had a confrontation outside where I live, because he used to stalk where I live, and he said he had a gun and was going to shoot me. So all this shit was going on while I was trying to work and do this, that, and the other. And I had to take a couple days off from work because they told me, like, stay away from work because he's following you over here. Just stay at home. And I remember there was one moment where he came to, there was a buzzer, there was a call box, and he came and my phone rang, and I saw it was the call box. And man, I started having chest pain. I started breathing. My heart started racing. And I was like, oh shit, this is what a panic attack is. But it triggered into that. So when you look at like the continuum of kind of mental health and trauma, like the experience of being hounded, the experience of being stalked, the experience of being told you're going to be shot like outside a corner in the rain as you're arguing with this dude that you had a good connection with for a little while until things started to unravel. And then now all of a sudden he's at your call box calling. I had a acute panic attack. What happened long term after that, because I had to get a restraining order, go to court, all that other stuff, it absolutely affected what I was doing with other brothers and how I dated and navigated dating after that. And I used to wonder, like, how did I get so closed off? Like, what happened? And so if someone does something that even would remind me of that experience, I would shut down or turn it off. And it's hard because, you know, you can say that you can get past it or move on it, but it's very difficult. And it's unfair to the people you date or the other folks that, you know, if you're carrying some of the stuff you experienced in high school to some of the brothers you're dating or some of your friends that you're interacting with, it's not fair to them, but they have to be understanding that this was a traumatic experience. And I go back to the fact that we have to redefine what trauma means.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean it doesn't only mean you served in the military and you got shot or you witnessed somebody die in front of you. It doesn't only mean that you were the victim of a sexual assault. Like trauma manifests in different ways. So understand that when you start acting kind of squirrely and you're not sure why, like think about the triggers, think about what's going on and exactly why that may be bothering you. And then you can kind of get to the root of it. And I think, you know, in addition to what they said on the definition of for the Mayo Clinic, like if you do notice it's going on for weeks, months, years, and you're noticing it's interfering with your daily life, that's when you should probably go and seek professional help. You may be able to handle it through other ways, and I know we're going to talk about some of the ways you can handle if you feel like you have post-traumatic stress disorder or you're realizing that there are things that have happened to you in the past that are traumatic that are manifesting now and getting triggered now. Like we joke with millennials and Generation Z, like, oh my God, I'm so triggered by this. Yes. And I mean, we can make fun of it on some levels, but triggering stuff is very real and it happens. And I do think millennials and Generation Z after millennials are a lot more acutely aware than Generation X and baby boomers. Yeah. They're able to recognize it sooner. So kudos to, and it's rare that I give kudos to millennials, but like kudos to millennials for like actually, and being cognizant of this and being upfront and being vocal about, like you said, like calling a thing. Yes. That triggered me. Yes. Like, we didn't grow up. That was not part of our language.
It just wasn't. And being able to do that now,
Right.
because first of all, when you can recognize something, then you can work on it.
Right. But if you don't recognize it at all, there's nothing to do.
Exactly. And when we think about Black gay experience, I can only speak for myself. You know, I remember, going to the club and being rejected. Like, I remember going to the house. I don't even do kickbacks anymore because they make me uncomfortable. If I'm going into a room with a bunch of people that I don't know, I'm assuming that no one's going to talk to me because I've had that experience
and you've internalized
before,
it to this point.
and I've internalized it to this point.
Right.
So once again, so I have some work to do on that still. But I know that it's there.
We all do, right. At least I know it's there.
I know it's there.
And so I think it's funny. It can be funny sometimes because you'll say, yeah, this is fucked up because this is how I'm acting, but I'm going to explain to you that this is the root of it.
Yes.
I haven't figured it out. I don't have a solution for it.
Right.
I don't know if I have the answer for it right at this moment that will not impact you. But I'm just telling you that I recognize that what I'm doing is fucked up. But it comes from a place that you may not be able to understand, but I need you to appreciate, acknowledge, and respect.
Woo. We are going to talk about... so I do want to chime in. So if there are folks, share your experiences as well. I think this is an opportunity where we can learn from one another. But I wanted to share, this is from a website. It's a UK-based website called Medical News Today. And they had some...
Those Brits.
Yes.
Always on the cutting
edge.
Edge.
They have some really cool ways to cope with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one they mention is mindfulness meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I am so not good at meditating. Now, if Fonda's watching this, she knows, and people who know that when I meditate, I'm my best self.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I would meditate, it would be my time in the morning.
Right.
That I literally was just with myself. And it was the first, when I do it and it's the first thing that I do, I know it works. I don't do it all the time. That's some stuff I have to work on.
But it works.
But it works.
Right.
And there's an app that I was using called Headspace. So folks have used Headspace. That's the thing. Do you meditate?
If meditation means sitting in front of a slot machine and gambling and not thinking, that could be meditation for me.
Indeed.
Or binging on Restaurant Impossible episodes, or Forensic Files, or X-Files, or Family Guy. I guess meditation for me isn't silence.
Okay.
It may be soft music in the background. It may be sitting outside and listening to nature. Mm-hmm. But like the sitting in silence, I think would drive me a little bit crazy. So I do other things. But zoning out and not thinking about things is therapeutic for me, and meditation for me, yeah.
Is Restaurant Impossible the one where the guy goes in and he fixes
the
like
big
the big
white
guy? Yes. I was like, is that the one?
And Restaurant Impossible, Robert Irvine.
That's his name.
So he comes in. They have a whole bunch of episodes. Like I thought it left Food Network for a while, and then I came on, and I was like, oh my God, I missed all these seasons. So I'm sitting there binging on it right now when I have time. But the thing is that he comes in. It turns out there's always something. It's a failing restaurant,
correct,
and he has to bring them back on their feet. So they have $10,000 in 2 days to revamp the entire restaurant. But what happens with him, he becomes this kind of pop psychologist.
Yes.
And he finds out what the roots of the problem were. Like that he had one single dad who he had a divorce because his wife left him by leaving a note. They worked at a restaurant together. And she left a note saying, "I'm gone. The kids are yours." And she ran away with the short order cook.
Wow.
From the restaurant, which is crazy. And so after that happened, he started taking it out on them. His finances went down the shitter, and he lost his passion for his restaurant. And so Robert Irvine comes in and kind of plays pop psychologist, brings the daughters in that he kind of alienated after that. They all have these conversations. Everybody cries. I cry. And then they have a whole new restaurant, and then they have a new lease on life. And they can go, yeah, and the food is good. They teach them how to cook better food, all this other stuff. So for me, that kind of meditation, I guess a formal psychologist or therapist or licensed clinical social worker wouldn't consider that meditation, but I do.
There you go. You have your thing.
So, yeah.
Number 2, they have regain focus through physical activity. True. I always feel better when like doing anything physical. So, first of all, I like doing things like outside. So, hiking, walking.
You go to Stone Mountain? Do you do Stone Mountain?
I haven't done Stone Mountain yet, which is weird because I live over there. But there's a lot of reasons why I haven't done it. My Saturdays be crazy. But
you don't have to go on a Saturday.
I know. That's
the
the
it's a
excuse
thing.
I'm using. I'm working on it. But I do like just kind of getting out and walking. Let me see. So they also have aromatherapy.
Mm-hmm.
If there are folks that are on here who use aromatherapy, I can imagine that would be amazing. I haven't done it, but that's worth trying. Art therapy,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
For those folks who are interested in art, there are artists who are also trained in art therapy.
Right.
You can find them in your local area.
I'm surprised. Did they say massage?
They didn't say massage, but let's add massage as our
I would
number
say that
5.
too. Massage would be actually something helpful because you can have aromatherapy during that
Yep.
with essential oils. For some, they can get a happy ending.
Yes.
So that may help.
Perfect.
With the meditation and moving past triggers or traumas from the past. So you never know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the last thing that they have listed is pets. Pets are great.
Pets are a good thing. Actually, I see studies that say that when people have pets, they live longer.
I can imagine that. Like, whenever I'm dog sitting, I think I'm the most like happy when I'm dog sitting because the dog is just so happy. So Alvin just put up a picture of his dog Bella. Bella is so cool. You know what I'm saying?
Alvin's gonna live forever.
Alvin's gonna live.
Immortality for Alvin.
Yeah. So, so thank you all so much for joining us for this conversation. We got to share some stuff with you. You're actually experiencing.
Are we sharing that this is a?
We are sharing that this is a recording. So
actually, it turns out that this is kind of like a test run.
This is a test
of what
run.
we're going to be doing for the future.
Exactly. So this is a test run
by accident.
I know, right? So thank you all so much. So thank you for joining us, continuing to join us for Revolutionary Health. So we are updating our format. So there are some new things we want to bring you. And the way that we're going to be able to do that is we're going to be pre-recording shows, much like what you're experiencing right now, right? But as you're also experiencing right now, one of us is going to be, or all of us can be in the chat with you, just chatting with you about the show itself.
Right.
So, but more importantly, you get to chat with one another,
right.
And share and experience. So that's going to be the new thing. Also, the new thing is we are moving the time for Revolutionary Health. We're going from a 7:00 show to a 9:00 show. So a lot of reasons for that. But one of the main reasons is we know that we have a bunch of folks on the West Coast that love Revolutionary Health. And they unfortunately have to watch it after we've aired it. So what we're going to do is we are going to start airing Revolutionary Health at 9 p.m.
Right.
So first thing we want to do, though, is we want to talk to y'all. So please email us at thecounternarrative@gmail.com. Let us know what you think about the changes, and also give us some ideas for shows that you would want to see as well. We want to hear from you. We hear from some folks. They will send us an inbox, but we want to hear from as many folks as possible because we are continuing to bring new and interesting shows, and we want to keep doing that.
Yeah, and I think the format will be a good one. And so we recorded the show live earlier, but it was glitchy. And some of our viewers told us it was glitchy. So we just decided, let's go ahead and re-record it. So it was just so weird that we were planning on announcing this anyway.
Right.
And then this is almost like a trial run. So what we'll do is through social media, really publicize this, really pump it up, give you guys a heads up about the date and the time that we're going to air the show. And then, like Johnny said, one or if not all of us will actually be there watching ourselves on the show while there's a live chat going on, which I think will be wonderful. And that doesn't mean that we won't do live shows in the future. Like something could come up, like the story with Lil Nas X. We could decide to kind of throw together a half-hour show, advertise for it, and then come on and talk with y'all live when something big happens. Like Antonio Brown getting accused of rape while he's trading teams and manipulating the whole NFL.
We are not saying it.
We're not doing that story, though.
No, that's not a thing.
But I mean, at least we can do those things. So the format will be a little bit more flexible, but what'll be nice is that we'll pre-record the shows, we'll release them to you guys so you know what the topics are, when they're coming out, and then we'll be able to chat with you live as you're watching the show, answer some questions, and maybe at the time when we originally record it, when we actually air it, some new stuff has come up, so we'll be able to talk about it then.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Revolutionary Health. We appreciate each and every one of you. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button if you are here with us on YouTube, and hit the thumbs up button. Follow us on social media. On Facebook, we're at The Counter Narrative Project. Instagram, we are at The Counter Narrative. And on Twitter, I don't know why Twitter is stumping me tonight, but it's building desire. So thank you so much for joining us for Revolutionary Health.
Serena.
We
still love you even though you lost. Serena
we love
Williams,
you, Serena.
You are the GOAT.
You are. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, y'all.